Here we are, once again, in Beit Meir, Israel. It is almost a snow day tonight. They're expecting snow here in Yerushalayim. We are in the book of Exodus, in Parshat Yitro. It is the portion of the Torah where we are going to get the Torah. So here we go. Vayishma Yitro Kohen Midyan Chosein Moshe Eis Kol Asher Asa Elohim LeMoshe Uli Yisrael Amo Ki Hotzi Adonai Es Yisrael Mimitzrayim. So Yisro heard. He heard what the rest of the world heard. We're told we have a medrash, a Talmudic understanding, historical understanding, that at the time of the splitting of the sea, if you were holding even a glass of water, it also split. The nature of water became that a body of water became split into two, repelled itself. If a scientist would have done some kind of a scientific examination of the phenomenon, he would have come up with some very natural answer for why it is that is happening at the moment. The molecular magnetism is changed in the veil of the halons of whatever, and they would have figured out something why it was happening. So the whole world knew that the sea had split for the Jews, and they had an explanation for it, but it was understood, it was known that it had happened, and that Egypt was in ruins because of the Jews, and everyone heard. But Vayikach Yisro Chosein Moshe Es Tzipora Eshes Moshe Achar Shiluchecha V'Eish Shnei Bonecha Asher Shem Ha'echad Gershom Ki Omar Ger Hayisi Be'eretz Nachriya V'Shem Ha'echad Elazar Eliezer Ki Elohei Avi Be'ezri Vayatzilenu Mecherev Paro Vayavo Yisro Chosein Moshe Uvanav V'Ishto El Moshe El Hamidbar Asher Hu Choneh Sham Har HaElohim. But Yisro was different than everybody else. Yisro put his knowledge into action. He took his inspiration and made it something that was real. The rest of the world heard, they were impressed, obviously, and they even stood back from the Jews, all except Amalek, which we'll talk about. We talked about a little last week, but we'll talk about a lot more in the future. But other than them, the whole world stood in awe of the Jews at that moment. But only Yisro picked himself up, took his daughter and his grandchildren, who was Tzipora, which was Moshe's wife, and Moshe's two children, and he picked himself up, even though at that point he was in a position of honor. He was a Kohen in Midyan, and he went out to the desert to live in a tent with the Jews because of what had happened. Vayomer el Moshe ani chosencha Yisro ba elecha v'ishtecha u'shnei vonecha ima. So he sends messengers to Moshe that I'm coming, your father-in-law, and your wife, and your two children. We're told in the previous psukim that the names of the children are Gershom and Eliezer, which the order of their naming is opposite of what would be intuitively understood to be the order of what their name should be. First, Moshe Rabbeinu is saved, and then his first son should be Eliezer. And then he lived for a while, for a long time. He was taken care of as a sojourner, as a ger, so he names his second son Gershom, but that's not the way it goes. He names his first son Gershom, and he names his second son Eliezer. And an explanation that I heard about that quite a while ago, I don't remember who it was from, is that when his first son was born, he wasn't certain how this was all going to turn out. If he was going to end up a Midianite shepherd assimilated into Midianite culture, then being saved from Paro's sword would not be any great shakes. But now that he sees that he was saved, and he was saved for a great purpose, and he was actually able to accomplish what it was that he is setting out to do, going back to Egypt and set the Jews free. So his second son he names Eliezer, because now it came out that what had happened previously was actually a salvation. So he comes out to the desert to see Moshe. Vayetze Moshe likras chosno vayishtachavu vayishak lo vayishalu ish l'reyehu l'shalom vayavo ha'ohelo. So Moshe Rabbeinu goes out to greet his father-in-law, and he kisses him, and they talk as friends, and they come into the tent. Vayisaper Moshe lechosno es kol asher asa Adonai lefaro uleMitzrayim al odos Yisrael es kol hatla'a asher matzasam baderech vayatzileim Adonai. So Moshe Rabbeinu tells his father-in-law all of the things that happened, everything that happened by Paro and by Egypt, and all of the great things, including the new great things, Kriyas Yamsuf, all the details, and the coming down of the birds, the meat that they got at night, and the man that they got in the morning, and the well, and all of the miracles, the fighting with the war of Amalek and being victorious over them, all of these things he told Yisro. Vayichad Yisro al kol hatayva asher asa Adonai liYisrael asher hitzilo miyad Mitzrayim. And Yisro is shocked. Yisro is, even though he knew most of it, but everything put together, he is overwhelmed by what Hashem has done for Klal Yisrael. Vayomer Yisro Baruch Adonai asher hitzil eschem miyad Mitzrayim umiyad Paro asher hitzil es ha'am mitachas yad Mitzrayim. So he goes into detail of all of the different things that they were saved from. They were saved from the bondage. They were saved from the embarrassment. They were saved from the people. They were saved from a hard king. All the different things. He goes into great detail of all the things that he's impressed with. V'ato yadati ki gadol Adonai mikol ha'elohim ki badavar asher zadu aleihem. So Yisro is described as a truth seeker. He goes, initially he even abandons his social position in order to seek. He attains high position and he abandons it to come out to the desert to be with the Jews after what he hears. And the thing that impresses him the most, however, because he's also a brilliant man, he understands that the fact that the Egyptians, who tortured the Jews initially by throwing our children into the Nile, were punished in the end in the Yamsuf, in the splitting of the sea, and they were drowned, and each one of them received a very specific dose of suffering according to the way that he treated the Jews back in Egypt. So Yisro saw and understood that Mida Keneged Mida, a being, a creature, a creation, not a creation, God forbid, a force that has control over every single piece of the creation so that they can be used, every piece of the creation can be used exactly in balance for what we, with our free will, decide to do, either according to God's will or against God's will, that every force in nature is available to speak back to me. Only the Creator could do that. And he understands that God is really God. Vayikach Yisro Chosein Moshe Ola Uzvachim Lelohim Vayavo Aaron V'chol Ziknei Yisrael Lechol Lechem Im Chosein Moshe Lifnei Elohim. This is the major point that I'd like to speak about here, is that he brings two different kinds of offerings. He brings a peace offering, a shlomim, and he brings a burnt offering, an ola. So the Netziv brings a verse from Hosea, where these two types of offerings are mentioned, and God says, I would rather chesed than your free will offerings, and I would rather a close relationship with you and that you understand who I am and what I want than all of your burnt offerings. So the Netziv says over here, he explains the purpose of these offerings, even though there was actually no temple at this point, there was even no tabernacle at this point. However, to bring offerings was for a purpose. Yisro was seeking something. He was seeking, number one, to come to an understanding of how a person can be selfless in his service of mankind, which is a peace offering, which is chesed. So when we do the work of the peace offering, and we do it in all of its details, and we slaughter the animal, and we watch it die, and we understand that life is precious, and we understand that everything in this world is for a purpose and to be used, and that a person has the ability to come to a place in their life where they're able to do against their own personal, even desires or welfare in order to do good for another person. That's the level that's attainable when we give ourselves over to the work of the sacrifice of the shlomim. The sacrifice of the olah, the burnt offering, is in order to attain an understanding and knowledge of what does God want from me and the world at this moment. So when we do the work in the right way with the appropriate desires behind it, then we accomplish, then we get those things. However, the Navi says very clearly, I don't want your sacrifices if they are devoid of the purpose. Who needs your free will offering if all it is to fill your stomach? And who needs your burnt offering if all it is to show off? I don't need that. I need you to develop the relationship. I need you to want to do chesed. I need you to want to do kindness to the world on a supernatural level. And that's why you do the avoda. If you abandon the purpose and all you do is hang on tooth and nail to the work, it doesn't work anymore. We should be zocheh to see the light. Light streaming in. It's foggy. It's so cold outside. Have a great day. Stay warm wherever you are.